Hello everybody, welcome to this new episode of Books Up Close. My name is Chris Lloyd, I hope you're doing well. So the book we're reviewing today is Katie Kitamura's fourth novel, Intimacies, first published in 2021. What I should say before I go any further is that you can buy all of the books that I mention on this channel from bookshops.org, which is a great, amazing online platform where you can choose local independent bookstores that you want to support, and part of the money that you spend goes to them. So you can buy directly from their store, or you can choose different stores each time you buy. But in all, it's a really good, ethical, great place to buy your books. And if you go to the link in the description below, you can buy the books from my affiliated store, which basically means I gather together and curate some reading lists, and you can buy them from there. So there is a list of all the books I review, as well as some other recommendations you might like. I may get commission if lots of people buy these books. I have to say that legally, but if you want to see all the books that I've mentioned, they're there anyway, as well as some of the reading lists from my university classes, as well as things that I'm looking forward to read soon. So Intimacies follows an unnamed narrator as she moves from New York to The Hague after her father dies and her mum moves back to Singapore. We don't know tons about the narrator. She is one of a string, I would say, in kind of contemporary literature that are quite withholding of information about themselves. Kitamura in this book at least has this incredible, spare, cool prose. Some people kind of compare it to someone like Rachel Cusk, though I think she's doing something slightly different from Cusk, because Kitamura's sentences are quite simple or direct, seemingly, very kind of cool and flat, not overly flowery. However, they are incredibly deceptive. While the lines are really clean and stripped back, from one sentence to the next, the narrator will shift in focus quite suddenly. If you're not entirely paying attention, you won't notice how we've gone from the one thing to the next. There are lots of these kind of elliptical moves that are never really spelt out, and I think that's partly why I think the novel is genius. I really, really loved it. So the narrator moves to The Hague because she is a translator, and she gets a job, at least temporarily, at what's called the International Court, which would, be one of these international criminal courts trying international dictators, war criminals, things like that. So she's going for this work that is incredibly political and international in scope, which is really interesting because most of the novel, or lots of the novel, is concerned with kind of local domestic relationship affairs. We see the narrator makes a boyfriend called Adrian who is separating from his wife, and they get on really well, and then suddenly he goes back to Portugal to visit his wife and kids, and he says he's going to be gone for a week, and he ends up being gone for a very long time. And the narrator doesn't really know what's going on, but she's living in his apartment for a while. And the book is really good at kind of lingering with some of the narrator's thoughts, but very quickly it shifts away. It's almost like the narrator doesn't really want to think about herself too much, and instead thinks about other people and other things going on. One of those is her friend Jana, who becomes obsessed with an incident that happens near her house. Someone is violently mugged, and as a way of finding out what that's about, she makes friends with the victim's sister, but doesn't really tell her why she's friends with her. There are a few other characters in the book, but it's a very small cast. We're really interested in the minute details of their relationships and the way they interact with each other. However, this is all against the backdrop of an African dictator, the kind of head of an unnamed African state, who is being tried for international war crimes, who the narrator has to translate for, both in the kind of behind the scenes meetings and also then in the court itself. These scenes are really interesting because you have various translators, right, translating across languages, from the dictator to the lawyers to the judge and jury, etc. So you've got at least 4 or 5 translators at once working with each other. And there are long descriptions whereby the narrator says in order to really do her job, she has to ignore the content of the words and just kind of listen to the language itself and kind of be with the words. And it's in this moment, I think, that the book tells us what it's doing, or something about what it's doing, which is about how the personal and the political interlink, right? There's something about the fact that in order for the narrator to do her job and translate for this man who it's quite clear has done terrible things, in order to kind of translate for him and allow his words to be disseminated to other people, she has to embody him. And there's some really clever slips of pronoun usage and language so that the I and the you becomes kind of quite blurry. So the I of the dictator becomes the I of the narrator. And there's something very interesting going on there about who tells stories, whose authenticity do we trust, whose version of events do we trust, how do we know what trust is, how do we know what truth is, how do we get to facts when they're translated and translated and translated, right? What happens if we don't all share the same language on a kind of literal level, kind of international languages, or indeed intimate personal languages of the self, of the other, of relationships and so on. And in that way, I think Intimacies is doing something really interesting and akin to other novels like, for example, Tae-Shu Cole's Open City, if you've read that, in which the kind of personal, intimate story is kind of wedded to or sutured to this much larger international, global scope, right? So that the narrator's personal politics, do I want to live in this city? How do I want to relate to my parents? Do I want to be with this man who's with his wife currently? How do I make friendships? Is stitched together with much larger questions about human responsibility to one another, about the atonement of crimes, about who pays for things that are done to other people. So I don't want to say too much more. Not that there's real spoilers to give here. It's not that kind of novel, really. It's incredibly beautiful, I would say, to read it slowly and kind of let the language sit with you. I think it's really, really beautifully done, and I want to read Kitamura's other two novels immediately. But, you know, there's too much to read, but I'll get there soon. Really, really thoughtful, lots of ideas going on in this book. If you have read it, please do let me know in the comments below. I'd really like to hear your thoughts. And as ever, please like this video, please comment below, please subscribe, ring the bell for notifications. Yeah, let me know what you're reading. I'm really interested. And please do check out the bookshop link in the description below. Okay, until the next video, look after yourselves, stay well, stay healthy, and keep reading.